Have you ever been to the Doghouse before? It's an older term, but it still checks out. For you younger people, as I found a completely stark white hair in my beard today, Jesus, it basically means you have done something to upset your significant other. Now, the best thing typically that you could do is engage in a cool-down period and then re-engage the issue if you're some giant nerd. Alright, well, disclaimer, that is technically the healthy move, but the unhealthy move is to bail on them for an entire weekend and then head to a small town where it's nothing but frisky women with murderous tendencies. Man, I should really call her. But considering we aren't here to make healthy choices, as a group of men try to amp up their boy who's going through a divorce, they would all agree to group up and then head to a town where the other man's grandma lives. Yeah, I'm just as confused as you are as to why this is the case. But as they do, however, their arrival contraindicates a good time. Unless social bonding through trauma sounds good, and having done that a few times myself, disregard, it's actually a great time. As an infection runs rampant, it becomes apparent only the females of the town have been afflicted by this illness. But what exactly is this infection, where did it come from, and why do women only appear to be susceptible? Let's discuss that in today's episode covering Doghouse. We kick off our story with Hanover Films. The Lion cares not for the plight of his hairline. As we fly over assumedly London, a man wakes up at 1 in the afternoon, a respectable hour. It's Vince. And I like how everyone just handles grief differently. I personally can't sleep more than 5 hours a night. I eat around like 1,400 calories max, and I go to the gym every day just to feel human, sometimes twice a day. I find it bizarre how some people can just sleep through everything, sit around and eat. It's like, how do you get out of your head doing that? The key is to make yourself so tired, it's no longer a problem. Follow for more jacked up tips from Roanoke. Going back to sleep, his phone then starts going off as he ignores his friends calling him. Over at another flat, as the Brits call it, I think, a woman now throws something at another guy, rather upset at him, as this was their second date. He can't remember her name, and evidently, they've already hooked up. Well, we know his name now, it's Neil. Jumping the fence, he goes back to his car with the steering wheel on the wrong side. Another man named Graham leaves his boyfriend, as the fourth man, Mickey, who's actively getting divorced, or at least getting it threatened, decides, screw it, I'm gonna go ahead and leave. Patrick is heading out on his wife too, as she is upset in the background. With Vince going through a divorce, obviously it's dude's night out for the weekend. Another guy at the comic book store kicks a youngling out of the store as we meet Matt. Vince gets kidnapped, and we get a montage of the women drinking and throwing the men's stuff out, as well as the boyfriend being upset as everyone who left appears to be in the doghouse. He said it. Heading to the Winchester, having a nice pint and waiting for all this to blow over, everyone drinks up and womanizes, as is standard when going to the pub. Asking where Banksy is, he's always late for everything apparently. Banksy, meanwhile, gets a call as he left his phone and keys inside, so he's got to now break back into his house. They call him a wanker as they discuss where they're even going. They amp up Vince as a picture of his ex-wife then comes out. Having learned recently, you really do got to get rid of everything and, throw up the ye old block. Basically, it's bad for your recovery arc if you don't. Remember that for later in life. Looking across the road, a woman is sharpening a knife. Nefariously, they discuss the plans. Get drunk, communicate like cavemen for the night, bring Vince back to his former glory, and just, in general, hang out with your boys. Hell yeah, brother. Leaving the pub, Banksy is on his way, as then they jump onto a tour bus and then head out of London. Banksy's van blows, though, because it literally blows a radiator, which is great times, and heading into the woods, the driver assumed that it wasn't even a real place to begin with, just that they didn't want to drink and drive around, which I have no idea who would want to just do that. But anyways, it literally is just a village in the middle of nowhere. Coming across a sheep completely eviscerated, or at least a group of them, everyone gets out and looks. Why? Well, who knows? The driver then pulls the sheep out of the way as Vince gets a call from his ex-wife. Others start getting calls from their women and boyfriend as they do the cliche thing, which is always a great plan. Put your phones in a bag completely out of your, immediate area, which removes any ability to contact anyone in any emergency. Very smart. Entering the town of Moodley, why would anybody willingly go here? It's like an incredibly small town in the middle of nowhere. There's one street, though I suppose doing it this way will keep you out of the forest with motor during some ritualistic practice, so at least there's that. So, you guys know Walking Dead? You know the town that's in there? I don't know, it was early on. Anyways, they always film that right next to my house down in Georgia. That town is tiny. Right? It's a very, very small town. That would be like me going to Sonoa to drink. Why would I do that? There's nothing out there. Anyways, except for that small town. Kind of grew up in that area. Nice place. Anyways, the driver then says in half an hour she's leaving with or without them because this place looks abandoned. Her eyelids are actually quite red, indicating possibly some form of infection has spread to her. Looking at the entire town, they need to secure beds and alcohol. So some of the men go to the pub that is clearly abandoned, while the other is tasked with going to his grandma's house and getting the bed situation in order. Dude's night out. Finding pictures of who to vote for, the man's picture is torn up. Also, there's a severed hand over there on the fence at Grandma's house. As Neil is bleeding the lizard, a woman is puking up blood in the bathroom, and bro, this whole town is like a terrible vibe. Time to just get out. It actually reminds me of this one time I was driving to the Pacific Northwest, and I was in Kansas, and it was like 6 p.m., and I'm like, I'm done driving for the day. So I just kind of got off the beaten path a little bit, walked into a bar that was attached to a gas station in this town of like 200 people. People legitimately turned and looked at me when I entered. I swear, all that was missing was like the record scratch. Typically, you leave those kinds of situations. I mean, I stayed and talked to the locals. Pretty cool people, but you're free to do whatever you want. So checking under the garden gnomes, he finds a key, but he finds also a bloody handprint. Smelling something terrible, Matt is outside, as then he finds a shell casing. Have I been saying Mickey because it's supposed to be Mikey? Now finds that a bride is eating her dog. You know, low blood sugar before the wedding and all that, or at least maybe his old dog, maybe his grandma's dog, who knows. So as she looks up and grabs an axe, she starts approaching him with malicious intent. Back in town, everyone watches a woman stumble down the street as a random military guy then just tackles her and goes to finish her off. It now becomes a brawl as the woman then grabs a knife and stabs Neil in the hand, mainly because they were trying to help her because they didn't know who this dude was, but he was trying to help you guys. Classic. So Mikey now shows up and smashes her over the head with a lawn gnome, knocking her down as Bridezilla is approaching along with a few other women from the Burning Witch. Getting back to the van, the driver has been infected, which it seemed a bit strange at first, but now that I actually think about it, it's probably not all that weird, which we will discuss that later. Not wanting to be eaten, they then lock her in there to prevent being attacked. Interestingly, all over the town, the women are all infected and the men are just completely torn apart or just straight up missing. Tools are still on the table. Grabbing the soldier's force multiplier, who's been strung up, he then tells him it's empty and not to go into the woods. Bridezilla then shows up, separating his cerebral hemispheres, as it becomes about keeping away from the women while they get the door open. Just remember 2nd grade when it was like boys versus girls and you should be good to go. Closing the door, they then lose track of the men as Vince then asks how this was supposed to cheer him up. Well, brother, I really don't think this was part of the plan. Of course, believe it or not, the number one way to recover from grief is actually novelty. You need to make new connections in your brain to override the old ones. So travel to new places, make new friends, eat new food, get put in a life and death situation with a bunch of zombie women with your best friends. And that one actually, like unironically, would probably help the most. Really puts your end into perspective, especially if you don't meet it. Anyhow, confused, they don't know if it's a virus that only affects women or bacteria. It could be the bird flu, or maybe something else. Trying to figure out where all the men went, the soldier then relays that all the men are actually dead. They are informed it's classified as far as what information he can give, and then he informs them that only women get the infection, and they don't know how many of them there actually are. The women are out in the woods looking for fresh meat, so they kind of lost track of everybody. I mean, I gotta ask, how many women were in this small of a town? And furthermore, if there are this many women in that small of a town, then when I go to Europe, I obviously just need to go off the beaten path. So Neil is then tasked with leading the bus driver away because of his self-proclaimed Women Love Me title. I too have been there. It's more of a tenuous situation than you might imagine. Opening the door, he then pokes the bus driver as she starts going after him. The rest of the guys get on the bus and try to get it started, but other women are already in there somehow. Don't know. I have no idea how they can use tools, obviously. They're using like axes and scissors and swords and all this stuff. I have no idea how they knew to be in there and then just hang out for the men. How did she open the door? We don't know. So leaving Patrick behind heroically, he takes an axe to the leg as he climbs up on the billboard. Entering the town seems like a great place to be, but really it's not. I mean, I guess it beats the woods. Getting approached by the townswomen, usually this is a good thing, as it becomes a massive fight. That's usually a bad thing. Patrick is able to start hitting them with golf balls with insane accuracy. Also, interestingly, some of the women will actually fight one another if an attack from another is felt. Neil now starts getting hit with a riding crop as Grandma then makes the scene and gets hit with a soccer ball. Running inside, Neil gets knocked out with a frying pan. That's brain damage. And entering the toy store, Vince and Matt realize they didn't lock the door as they hold off Christina Scissorhands over here and they light her arm on fire. Meanwhile, Mikey and the soldier man are in the clothes store with Graham as they dome one of the women and then close the curtains. I know, there's a lot going on at once, but I gotta set the scene for you. Matt has an idea, however. Using the RC car, they drive it around the women and get it over to the other guys with the radio. Neil, meanwhile, has been tied up at a dinner with some sort of older woman. He makes a pass at her to take it upstairs, attempting to flirt his way out of this. What is it? If I can't mansplain, manspread, or man-whore my way out of this, manslaughter it is, or some stupid shit like that. Anyways, so she starts freaking out as then she crawls under the table, which, sweet lord, this is activating my almonds. Cutting off his finger, thank God. She then eats that. Bridezilla is still going absolutely ham on the billboard trying to chop it down to get to Patrick. As everyone discusses the fact that they don't even have a plan, Matt builds a flamethrower out of a toy, as Mikey now says he has a plan, and then grabs the head of some random dude and puts it on the truck. Dancing in the window to get the women to come over to that way, they send the truck out, attracting them away. Mikey then heads towards an armored-ish truck, but it's locked. And as I recall from what my former girlfriend said to me about military vehicles, they're never, like, truly locked, so they actually legitimately get stolen, evidently. I'm guessing England got that memo and they just locked their doors. I don't really know. That's just absolutely wild to me. Like, how are you getting on base to jack these things? Now, I guess it could be stored in like a less secure place, which is more likely the scenario. Tax-paying dollars, hard at work right there. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. Using a brick, it doesn't work. The truck is still on its wheels, as then they flip it, and I'm not really sure how they even saw it fall over, because they were inside hiding, and it seems like that thing took several corners to get to where it was, but the head comes off the truck as the women then start eating it. Mikey sets off the alarm as the women now approach him with malicious intent. Running into a store and locking the door, Neil is not having a great time over there as his finger then gets eaten by the older woman. Mikey has apparently entered the butcher's shop, which is not ideal given what's going on with these women. As his radio goes off, she's alerted as Vince and Matt have the flamethrowers ready. Vince is given what is essentially a cricket from MIB, as then they head out yelling as they set the swordswoman on fire. Using it once, the flamethrower is immediately set on fire as it's made of plastic, as then the toy store is detonated because it follows just the leaking fuel all the way back. Mikey is getting thrown around like a baby in a dryer by the butcher, as then he runs and then heads back inside the clothing shop as the women all head over there to chase Mikey. Vince and Matt run off to another building where biohazard boxes are labeled, and seemingly the military was operating out of this area. But Graham has an idea, as they all dress as women and put on a male mannequin, or put up a male mannequin in the window to attract attention. Walking out, it seems like it's working, as then they head towards the church. Finding the experiments that they were conducting, it seems a bit screwed up. Essentially, this seems intentional. Bridezilla has now knocked down the billboard as Patrick hobbles off to the bus. Using his 9-iron, he then takes out Bridezilla, and Neil takes out his captor finally, with only one finger down as he escapes through the skylight. Getting to the church, they spot Neil in the distance as he breaks through another window, falling onto the bed, as then they all start fighting, as then Soldier tells everyone to get inside. He pulls a real force multiplier on them as they all run into the church. Neil now says he never used that finger for anything anyhow, which, yeah, you know what? That's a great way to reframe that. I mean, who needs a pinky anyhow? I don't know. We really don't. I mean, I guess it would be harder to type on the computer, but apart from that, I mean, is it really all that necessary? So they discuss women for a minute. It happens a lot. Actually, I'm going to talk to my 13% of my audience. It happens a lot more than you think. It's usually just a collective, I don't get it. I can't tell you how many times I have heard that exact statement. Anyways, so for a minute, they just discussed that as a soldier then finds a device which turns on all the surveillance footage. Met Nut, which was the, I guess, mayor who was running for office, now answers them as she asks where the colonel is, as then she cuts the feed because she doesn't want to be associated with it. Looking out, something else is happening. Phase 2 of the infection. Phase 2 results in the infection deepening as they mutate and apparently get smarter and have better vision, and here at a much higher capacity. Bridezilla then starts going absolutely ham on the church door as they go to release a sound emitter that only women can hear that is allegedly painful and should immobilize them. Soldier then spills the spaghetti out of his pocket about how it was meant to turn women against men in controlled areas. You know, fight wars without soldiers. Yes, that always seems to go well. Like, this is always the idea in every single thing. Like, oh, we don't want to fight, so we'll just make them fight themselves. It's like, it just doesn't seem to work. So Soldier Man gets his spine cut in half by Mikey's grandma at this point, as she gets taken out next. Matt, meanwhile, is getting taken out by a swordswoman as Vince informs the group that he is in fact gone. Breaking in almost immediately, Mikey then goes after her to finish off her, I guess, as Banksy has now arrived at Moodley. Taking the sword from her, they then take her out, which you should probably just straight up keep that sword. Hearing the door creak open, they then leave the sword behind. Brother, what? Go back and get that. That is like, look, okay, obviously a force multiplier is pretty good, but a force enhancer, I would take that too. It's a lot better than a 9-iron. So Bridezilla is still going absolutely ham on the door as they descend further into the church zombie testing ground. It's a bloodbath down there as they find a pile at the end. It's all the men as they are being consumed by the women. Anyways, I want to make a joke there, but the wounds are too fresh. Running back upstairs, Bridezilla then makes it through the door as then they head upstairs. Banksy now finds the lighter from earlier as he finds them and is told to go grab the ladder. They inform him about what's happening, which he thinks they have been taking drugs, which, I mean, I would probably ask my friends the same thing. Banksy is then knocked off the ladder onto the other roof as they build a ladder bridge to get across. Old lady then makes the scene spotting Neil, as then she goes after him, and she's able to break past the barricade pretty quick because she is, I guess, a literal tank at this point. Graham is then knocked down onto the ground as the old lady jumps down on him, assumedly taking him out. Not a pleasant way to go. Retreating to Banksy's ride, it is a smart car. Look, here's all I'm saying, right? 20 miles per hour riding on the roof is still preferable to running out of there. Like, lock and load, brides of Christ. Everybody cram into that clown car, and whoever you can't cram into that clown car, start finding a place to sit on the roof. Patrick says this isn't anyone's fault, as saying he's like, I'm not gonna die here, which we all know it's about to happen. So he immediately gets taken out by Christina Scissorhands. And then going back to the bus, Banksy gets stabbed by a beer bottle as everyone starts dropping like flies. Getting on the bus, Vince then begins suffering a midlife crisis. Vince starts talking about how he was screwed over into becoming reliable and mature, and how he was willingly domesticated. Alright, look, this is just advice with Papa Roanoke. Some people are going to agree with this. Some people aren't going to agree with this. That's the beauty of life. The key is you need to keep some level of unpredictability in your life. That's what keeps interest high. That's what keeps polarity high. Go on that trip. Make a different decision. Fight those zombies. When you become predictable, you become boring. I'm not saying you can't develop, like, you shouldn't be going out there being absolutely crazy, being completely unpredictable, because then you're unreliable. But if you come home at 5:10 every single day, you go through the same routine, you go to bed at 10, I'm just saying if you become too predictable, that kills attraction. So go do something. Go to the gym. Go for a run. Go meet up with your boys on a Wednesday night. Just do something that keeps the interest. Anyways, I'm going to conclude that there. Coming to this realization, he then lights his ex's picture on fire and then starts driving out of there. Driving through people's backyards, he starts running down zombies as they escape. Meanwhile, Graham appears to have survived being flattened, as then he calls back out to the group. He says he's in the nest, as Vince then says he's coming to get them. Grabbing the sound emitter, they use everything but the road, which is a terrible idea given that's your ride out of there. Like, seriously, he wrecks the bus. Why didn't you just use the road? It was right next to you. Grabbing some wood, they then go to square up with the women. Meanwhile, Graham has found the disconnected line and then plugging it back up. The women are immediately immobilized by the sound. Graham then emerges as they turn off the sound as they come to attack again, and then the sound is restarted. So, being way too cocky about that, Neil keeps hitting the sound as then he throws the transmitter, which they call them all bricks for hands, as then he breaks the sound controller. Putting Graham in the cart, they then run out of there with him as the women are on the loose more permanently, and thus concludes the ambiguous end of Doghouse. Hello, and welcome to the science portion. So there is quite a bit to go over here, from the auditory immobilization of women to even the vector that this disease seems to spread in. Vector, of course, being the way in which a pathogen is able to infect, like the rats being the vector for the Black Plague. I only bring that up because I've actually had somebody ask what a vector was before, and I realized I never actually explained that one, so there you go. Okay, so I think the first place we should clearly start is going to be what the actual transmission method is, which will begin with a speculation on this one, and then move into why we would like to believe the reason men do not get sick is because of just being absolute gigachads, and we have amazing immune systems, but the reality is, much like a cat throwing up on your floor, you might hate it, you might want to believe it's not there, but it is, and reality is usually far more disappointing. It looks to me that clearly the mayor is involved in this outbreak, obviously. Though her role is really never truly explained, it appears as though she sold out the people of Moodley to this test, possibly believing that it would just be like a regular illness, far less aggressive than it turned out to be. In this sense, perhaps she was offered the mayorship, and as a result, if she complied, everything would be good to go, but regardless, this is clearly a disease, but what sort would it be? To understand that, we need to understand how it actually even spreads in the first place, or the aforementioned vector. The dead giveaway to me is earlier when the bus driver becomes infected. It's a blink and you'll miss it sort of deal, and you may be inclined to believe that it's actually just an auditory illness, almost like Pontypool, or what was that one movie where like the signal from the tower or whatever? I covered it. I literally covered it on this channel. My brain has purged it. Anyways, it's like that, right? People are probably going to believe it's like some of the other movies that I've covered, but absolutely it is not. The bus driver was most definitely infected the second she touched that sheep. Given that the other women are running around tearing apart man and animal, the reality is there is a fluid associated with that, and that is saliva. When the women descended upon the sheep and began to tear it apart, it clearly would be them eating it. At some point, some of their saliva would be on the sheep. I do not believe this illness actually can go through the skin of a person, but later, when she is holding her eye open to put in eye drops, we see her eyelids are already inflamed red. But why? Well, when your immune system first becomes aware of a pathogen in its midst, the usual on-the-scene first responder is going to be the humble macrophage, also known as the white blood cell. This is your innate immunity, and its job is to float around casually and just sort of check around for anything that shouldn't be there. Extending their little pseudopodias out, which is their arms, they will then test their environment for anything that is not supposed to be within this area. Actually, macrophages have a lot of abilities at their disposal when it comes to this task, the main one being the pattern recognition receptors. These are essentially proteins that can sense molecules from pathogens as well as damaged cells in their immediate area. It's actually quite fascinating because, I mean, like, really think about it. Here, you have this thing, like, I don't know, that could just identify lipopolysaccharides on gram-negative bacteria, RNA from viruses, flagellin from bacterial flagella, and peptidoglycan from bacterial walls. These PRRs can actually detect these, and it will actually light up the macrophage into saying, "Hey yo, get out of here," which will immediately kick off the inflammation string of events. At this point, the macrophage will declare it does not vibe with this universe as it releases pro-inflammatory cytokines. This will kickstart quite a few things, but the main one that you need to know is the battleground will be flooded with fluid so that the macrophages can actually operate better, and chemical signatures will reach the bloodstream, recruiting more help to deal with the pathogen, as well as dendritic cells will be alerted to kind of show up in the area, clean up the battlefield to find specific receptors that they need to find or pieces of the pathogen, and then they'll go present that to B cells, which then create antibodies, and T cells will eventually show up and be like, is anybody here infected? And then they'll just start killing cells on site. NKT cells, absolute chads. So all this is happening in her eyelids, which have turned red and inflamed. Given this, well, the adaptive immune system hasn't really showed up yet, but the innate is going full on, like, goblin mode. So given this immune response, she is clearly infected at this current point in time. Now, she was already putting the eye drops in there, so a bit of assumptions have to be made here. At some point, given her eyelids appear to be the first dealing with this issue, we can assume this area was exposed first, which actually, given the mucous membranes in that area, this is quite standard when becoming infected. Usually you rub your eyes or somehow transfer the infection to your mouth by eating with your hands, or like you pick your nose or something, which always remember, you can pick your friends and you can pick your nose, but you can't pick your friend's nose. Something like that. Anyways, so based on this inflammation and the interaction with the sheep earlier, it's clear to me that this is not an auditory disease, but an honest-to-God biohazard. And given what we see later in the church, I mean, that becomes pretty obvious, I suppose. However, you're always going to have someone who thinks it's auditory given the connection with the sound later, but trust me, it would have happened if I didn't defend my point as vehemently as I did. So just believe me when I say, and also I'm going to explain the immobilization later. And it has nothing to do with the sound waves causing these issues. It's really more of a neurological issue. Okay, so we have figured out what the vector is. It's not likely airborne in any real capacity. It's not auditory. It's very likely to be contained within the bodily fluids of a woman, like the saliva left over on the sheep. So it's rabies. No, it's actually not rabies. There are too many mutagenic effects, at least in how it is interacting with the brain, that we have to get into. Although, you know, I'm not gonna spoil it, but I mean, this is me after all. I'm like House, stuck on the idea of it's lupus, and then it never turns out to be lupus. This symptomatic presentation can be broken up into two phases, as indicated by the soldier earlier, although the actual infection itself does not really seem to induce really any physical changes. More so, it's a wiring type of issue, which, oh God, it is gonna be rabies, isn't it? Actually, it's not. It's gonna be worse. Granted, this whole situation seems a bit rough, but technically speaking, it's worse. You know what? Considering death, no, it's not worse. Yeah. Anyway, so upon entering the actual township, it's clear there is likely as much behaviorally going on as there is concerning an infection. The question we would have to ask is, why would women be more aggressive to men? Well, now that we've kind of paused to think about that, well, look, I'm not going to categorize an entire section of the species based on my own anecdotal experiences. I have made many a woman upset in my life. You know, it's usually just because I say something or do something, and yeah, they don't vibe with it. You know what? I'm detecting also a vibe generally, at least online, that there may be a bit of stored up aggression towards their male counterparts. I know we can really get into the weeds with this whole thing, but truth be told, even with that simple statement, I probably just riled some people up. But let's put it this way. People have their proclivities, and aggression from both sides can be directed at the other, and this is unfortunately fairly common. But would this be enough of a driving force to actually induce this much aggression in females towards males? And to understand this idea, we need to talk about why this would even just affect females in the first place. So I've said it once and I'll say it again, man flu is a real thing, but as with all things, it's nuanced. Now, before the 12.6% of my audience click off because it's a guy talking about man flu and why it's a real thing, it really is all in how women's bodies handle pathogens and how men's, even with the virus I have in mind, also handle pathogens. And this will sort of fly in the face of that logic, but it is still something that does exist. If you take a man and a woman both infected with rhinovirus, which is the common cold, at the same time, the woman may be better in a shorter amount of time with less symptoms as she is not, or if she's not immunocompromised, as the innate immune system of a woman is typically going to be stronger, along with the actual adaptive immune system getting in the game faster due to things like estrogen not inhibiting immune function like testosterone does, and the X-linked immune genes, allowing for the body to actively have more information, one X from the mother, one X from the father, to basically draw information from to deal with pathogenic infections. Believe it or not, that is actually a massive leg up, and this can allow for things like faster viral clearance, which is fantastic when dealing with the flu or common cold, whereas men have slower viral clearance. The innate is clearing viruses quicker in women, and the adaptive can actually respond in a way that is more targeted given more information is available. Now, it may seem like, well, why do they get such good immune systems? And to my male audience, think about it. They carry the offspring. They need their immune systems to not only defend their bodies, but the genetic prodigy as well. The immune systems have developed in order to do this. Now with men, it's not like we're just big babies or anything with an illness, but for everything there is a reason, so to speak. Men have higher levels of testosterone, which actually inhibit certain immune functions, allowing for viruses and bacteria to initially build up to higher amounts. This will trigger a stronger immune response later, with more inflammation and more of a signal to the brain to stay down to deal with this infection. I, for one, retreat into one room of the house when I was with people back in the day, but now that I live alone, I just retreat into my house in general. Nobody is going to catch me saying, honey, get the priest. I'll just die on my couch. That's what I'm going to do. But now you know, it's actually a buildup of the infection itself, ultimately, and then men respond later with stronger inflammation responses, and in general, our own hormones will actively work to inhibit our immune systems, and it's all very fun, but it is not all a positive for women either because of estrogen, right? Estrogen may not inhibit immune function, but it has other things that it does, which kind of put them in the line of fire, at least concerning this disease. Now, the question is, with a stronger immune response, do women react in the same way that is clearly them being infected and men not? I believe it, once again, comes down to potentially estrogen and progesterone. Now, obviously, these two hormones are much more common in women than they are in men, but they have a bit of a drawback in their own ways. More importantly, they can alter the blood-brain barrier permeability. Under normal conditions, estrogen actually strengthens the blood-brain barrier, but when in a state of high inflammation, like during an infection, the estrogen will favor enhanced immune cell migration, which actually alters the cytokine and chemokine expression, which in turn makes the blood-brain barrier more leaky, shall we say. Which seems counterintuitive given that you are dealing with an infection, but for survival, risks have to be taken consistently. Think about us hunting, mammoth back in the day. It's a risk, but you gotta eat. Progesterone has actually the opposite effect. It actually increases permeability under normal conditions. By reducing the nitric oxide cycle, it actually ends up impairing endothelial stability, making it more vulnerable to infections. Now you may be asking, well, why does the body even do that then? Well, everything your body makes, technically, it has a purpose. Me personally, I have been dumping cortisol in varying amounts for, 3 months now, which is as fun as it sounds. The purpose is my environment has changed, and as a result, my body is in an increased stress state, and as a response to that, it's like, hey dude, if we want to survive, we better be stressed. It's actually really stupid, right? Logically, it's dumb. But too much cortisol actually in your body for too long can increase cancer rates and also lead to infections and sleep issues, and it's not a great thing for you to deal with at high levels for at least too long, and exhaustion. That's essentially what leads to burnout. But we have talked about how testosterone affects males as well, and this is just one of the drawbacks to being female. The hormones have actual functions, but that doesn't mean it's going to always be beneficial 100% of the time. You are an incredibly finely tuned machine. Never forget that. And throwing a grain of sand into the gears does have its consequences, you know? So then what are we seeing with the women? As the infection hits, I believe what we are kind of noticing here is a combination of the initial infection, a predisposition towards a more unstable blood-brain barrier, and a virus moving through into the actual brain. With the men, however, the fact that the blood-brain barrier exists as it does keeps them technically uninfected, but much more likely, in my mind, I think they're just asymptomatic. Trust me, it's all gonna make sense here shortly. But before getting there, let's look at what happens to the women on a neurological level, and a physical one, I guess, during phase 1. As we take a look at the women, we see that they're actually moving in a much more ungainly fashion, as if they have like a tenuous control over their movements. It's sort of like when your legs fall asleep and you're really just cutting off blood supply to nerves in that area, which, I don't know, you ever wake up and your arms are just completely asleep and you're like, oh God, yeah, I don't know. Ever since I started lifting more lately, I'm kind of on my winter arc, as Gen Z says, but I've been on it since July. My arms fall asleep all the time now. It's gotta be a pinched nerve, but essentially the nerves are not vibing as well as they usually do, and in the way that they move, this indicates massive disruption in the primary motor cortex concerning the actual women who are infected, not concerning you waking up with your arms numb. So I needed to clarify that because I realized I just went through that sentence really, really fast. But for the women, there is disruption in the primary motor cortex as well as the cerebellum, although the signals themselves may actually be having difficulty moving across the brainstem, which falls in line perfectly with what I believe this to be, because the virus that we are talking about today, actually the brainstem is affected, which is why it's deadly. However, what is not lost is the prefrontal cortex, at least not in some major way. The reality is, given their tool usage during even just phase 1 of their infection, such as axes, scissors, swords, and in general, a turkey cutter to cut off a pinky, it's clear to me that their brains are still working in some capacity, and so is thought and planning. However, even with this being the case, is a visual sight of a male that they are trying to attack, is that really enough desire to pursue? And if so, what's going on with that? Well, one of the things you have to remember is that humans are, at their core, social creatures. Heterosexual males unconsciously scan for women. Heterosexual females unconsciously scan for men. This is pretty standard, and we do it without even really thinking about it. It does happen. The circuitry of the brain itself is involved in scanning for different things that may seem important to that individual, but regardless, the human brain is a master of labeling things as male or female. When looking at another person, you do it with literally zero cognitive input. It's just how our minds are wired to operate, and this is the process by which the women are relentlessly pursuing the males and identifying males as well. It seems like anything that is perceived male is attacked because of the salience network majorly becoming, I guess, corrupted is the best way to put it. This is essentially the portion of the brain that would identify socially and reproductive stimuli. Think of the big women cutting off Neil's finger, right? She was reproductively stimulated. It is a link to the visual systems of the brain, more specifically the occipital lobe and the fusiform gyrus, which helps us identify facial patterns such as jawline, size of the head, location of the eyes, build of the shoulders, hip ratio, all the stuff, male or female. There's something, not something, it's fusiform, but it is our brain looking for patterns, because patterns are easier to remember than taking everything individually and just applying new thought to it, I guess is the best way. One uses way more energy. So essentially, markers that would identify the skull as belonging to a male or female in the infected woman's eyes. And anything that looks remotely like a male is then attacked, as it's essentially a hijacked salience network coupled with other areas of the brain, specifically likely disruption in the amygdala. It's quite apparent that the infection resides within the brain at first, increasing aggression and causing the woman to ruthlessly tear men apart, as well as any other animal in the area, indicating that also the hypothalamus has gone off the deep end and hunger is turning them completely rabid. But there is also the attraction network that has been activated that in turn is contending with a massive increase in hunger, as well as aggression being amplified by the disruption of the amygdala. This is phase 1, essentially the virus settling into the brain, inducing a sort of encephalitis that would in turn cause the woman to get completely lost in the sauce, resulting in massive misfirings. The ungainly walking around, as the brainstem is also affected due to inflammation, which is going to disrupt signals, and just in general, they're not as capable as a normal human female would be. However, phase 2 is worse, and it kind of starts bringing it back a little closer to the human realm, but not entirely. It appears as though the virus is not lethal despite it invading the neurological systems of the skull. And to this end, we can see that the brain is operating in some capacity, but once the virus has moved out of the areas in between neurons, which is likely disrupting it, and into the neurons themselves, this is when their wiring is functionally altered. They will not become stronger, more aggressive, and possibly smarter because of some increase in neural capacity, but because the neurons will now start behaving somewhat more normal. Once the infection has existed long enough in the brain, it's possible more normalized firing patterns will be reestablished, allowing for things like cognitive function to rise back up. And with this, the temporal lobe will now actually interpret sounds heard more readily rather than filtering out noise, which is what our brains standardly do now. Because if you heard everything ever said, imagine living in a city and not being able to turn off your brain. Not your brain, but your sound. The overstimulation would be insane. So every noise is something worth investigating to them, whereas with a normal human, it's not. And it's not that they can hear better, it's just, or like the hairs of their ears have been repaired. It's more that the brain is interpreting things differently due to the influence of the virus. Their strength also is now less limited by the brain itself, as the protective functions have changed. In humans, it's my favorite little factoid, but our brains limit our strength in an effort to protect our joints and muscles. So the average person may only have access to like 30 to 50% of their strength. If you work out, you may access a higher percentage, like 60%. If you're like a power lifter, then you may access 80%. But it's kind of a similar thing if you're adrenaline dumping. 80% is about the max out point. People have probably accessed higher, but eventually muscle will tear from bone. However, with women, due to the neurological changes, their brain is no longer limiting them as they are perceiving things differently, which then results in them appearing stronger because their strength is also no longer limited, although it was always there. They just didn't have access to it. The frontal lobe may now operate at a higher capacity, not a complete human capacity, but higher than phase 1 infected, which is why they appear smarter. I believe this idea in general of different operating capabilities is clearly demonstrated by the sound being emitted and that immobilizing them, because their temporal lobe is more specifically operating in a way that is not intrinsically beneficial to humans, but more beneficial to the virus and its spreading. When the sound is emitted, what we are seeing is basically the temporal lobe at the behest, which is my favorite word, I guess, of the month, even though it's October. Welcome to Spooky Month. Anyways, of the virus, the virus is prioritizing its own spreading. So it is essentially force firing the neurons because there's sound that it's detecting, which then bleeds over into the rest of the brain, causing the brain to enter a seizure-like state because the brain will not ignore the noises anymore. In fact, we already know auditory issues can induce seizures, or at least seizure-like symptoms. But this is what locks them up. But it only works in phase 2 because the brain has to be altered in its functioning, and this is also why with normal humans it doesn't work like with the rest of the men, because their brains, it's not so much that they're ignoring it, but you ever been sitting there, right, and your brain, you're just, everything goes quiet in one ear and then you go ee, like that noise that gets really loud and then it just stops. That is essentially a runaway cycle that your brain then identifies. I was like, oh, whoa, chill, and then it stops that from continuing. So think of that, except like your brain can't function to the point to stop that runaway cycle. But okay then, with all that said, what exactly is this virus? I actually believe it to be a very clearly altered form of Japanese encephalitis virus for quite a few reasons. First, while globally men are more affected by the virus, when women become infected, there appears to be a stronger immune response to the actual virus invading their brains. And this would induce like a worse form of encephalitis, as made mention in the brain, but it's also how the virus spreads. We know like that birds and pigs are reservoirs for the virus, which they did mention swine flu earlier, and I do wonder if that's a call out to that. But along with that, when it makes the jump to humans, we actually cannot build enough of this virus in our blood. So as a result, mosquitoes can't pick up enough of it. That's actually how it spreads. But we can be infected and it can head to our brains. But in women, due to their immune responses, they appear to be more strongly affected in some cases. Men, on the other hand, have a less initial inflammatory response, which in turn may not make them exhibit symptoms as aggressively. But it's also important to remember the virus was engineered, so while JEV was the base virus, it's clearly been gain-of-functioned in a way that has altered how it actually attacks the meat suit. Now, because humans in general cannot build up this virus in a high enough level for mosquitoes to even transmit it, we are considered a dead-end host for the virus. And given the permeability of the blood-brain barrier due to estrogen and progesterone specifically, the women would be more heavily affected, and it may be given that the virus was altered while, if it's in men, the virus may not be able to cross the B cubed, and it may just float around the bloodstream of specifically men, inducing some symptomatic consequences for males, but far less devastating than for the women. However, with women, once it crosses the B cubed, it's not a great time, and then their brains are heavily affected. Now, could males possibly be infected later? Probably. I mean, you're talking a very, very small group of men at this point, and some of them are even dropping, and all the other men were taken out way too quickly for them to probably even display symptoms. And given that the women will attack each other, it's likely if any of the men were even infected in the first place, the women would still attack them because they would still have male characteristics, and the salience, I guess, network is still up and running to a degree. But this is also why this isn't really like true zombieism or anything. Like, zombies will ignore each other, but these women will attack one another if they kind of get in the way, which is fairly interesting. Well, I want to hear what you guys think. Do you believe it to be Japanese encephalitis virus or something else? Let me know down in the comments. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales channel link, which is taking off, which has been pretty cool to see, and other links in the description. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. I want to thank our astronauts, Kusith and Saucy Dub Socks. Or is it Dubs Ox? Dub Socks? Probably Dub Socks, I think. Anyways, thank you guys for your awesome support. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Des Dancer, and Mayura. Thank you guys as well. Next up, I'd like to thank our scientists, Stutz, Frank Shaftcrank, I Actually Love Electric Cars, and the Anglerfish, Metric System, Invictus, Echo, and Efficient Texan. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support. It goes a long way towards helping out and keeping the lights on around here, so thank you. But all right, that's going to do it for me. Hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.